I'm tired. Not the kind of tired sleep can fix, but the kind that comes from walking a long road with your heart wide open. I've searched for something simple, real love, not perfect, not dramatic, just true. And along the way, I've learned something no one warns you about. The search doesn't just show you who others are, it shows you who you are, your patience, your scars, your strength. Some days you keep going because you still believe, other days you keep going because stopping would mean giving up on the part of you that still hopes. And maybe that hope is the bravest thing we have left. Today, I'm not here to tell you I found love. I'm here to tell you I survived the search. And if you're tired too, you're not broken. You're human. I'm tired in a way that doesn't show on my face but lives somewhere deeper, somewhere behind the eyes and under the ribs. A tiredness that comes from giving pieces of yourself to people who never knew how heavy those pieces were. A tiredness that builds slowly every time you believe again, every time you convince your heart that this time might be different, that this time you won't have to explain why you care so much, why you stay, why you try, and you start to realize that the most exhausting part of searching for true love isn't the loneliness, it's the hope, because hope asks you to stand up one more time when you've already learned how hard the ground feels. It asks you to open doors you've already closed for survival. It asks you to speak honestly in a world that prefers convenience over depth, and you keep doing it because somewhere inside you still believe that connection is worth the cost, even when the cost keeps rising, even when the heart starts moving more slowly, more carefully, like someone walking through a room filled with broken glass, measuring every step, remembering every cut, and still choosing to walk forward. You don't wake up one day tired, it happens quietly, through conversations that fade without explanation, through promises that sound sincere but dissolve under pressure, through moments when you realize you're the only one holding the thread together while the other person is already letting go, and you tell yourself not to take it. Personally, you tell yourself everyone is doing their best, but your chest still feels heavier each time, because love was never casual to you. It was never something you tried on like an outfit. It was something you stepped into fully, something you respected, something you believed deserved patience and presence and honesty. And over time, you start to notice how rare those things have become, how often vulnerability is mistaken for weakness, how often depth is avoided because it requires courage. And that realization alone can drain the strongest heart. There's a specific kind of fatigue that comes from being emotionally available in a disconnected world, from listening more than you speak, from seeing people clearly while they only see parts of you, from carrying empathy into spaces where it isn't returned. And you begin to understand that you've been doing emotional labor without calling it that, holding space for others while slowly abandoning your own, telling yourself love means sacrifice without realizing you've been the only one sacrificing. And the body remembers these things, the silence after messages go unanswered, the pause before you allow yourself to feel excited again, the way your expectations shrink not because you want less, but because asking for more has taught you how often people walk away. You become tired of explaining your intentions, tired of reassuring people that you're not asking for too much, tired of pretending that inconsistency doesn't hurt. At some point, you stop questioning why things didn't work and start questioning why you keep trying the same way, why you keep offering gold to people who only know how to hold sand. And this isn't bitterness, it's awareness. It's the slow recognition that love requires two people willing to stay present when things become uncomfortable, when masks fall, when excitement turns into effort and you've been meeting people at depths they were never planning to reach. And that imbalance has weight, it accumulates, it settles into your posture, into the way you hesitate before trusting again. There's exhaustion in realizing that you've been brave for a long time, that you've continued to show softness in a world that rewards detachment, that you've kept believing in meaningful connection while being told directly or indirectly that caring less would make things easier, and maybe it would, but that's not who you are. And becoming someone else just to survive love would cost more than the loneliness ever could. So you keep going, not because it's easy, but because giving up would mean betraying the part of you that still believes in sincerity. And even when you're tired, deeply tired, you understand that this exhaustion is proof of how fully you've lived, how honestly you've loved, how willing you've been to risk disappointment for the chance of something real. And that matters, even on days when it feels like it hasn't mattered to anyone else, even when the journey feels endless, even when your heart moves slower now, carrying wisdom where hope used to be lighter, heavier, but still beating, still open, still searching, without knowing how much longer it can do this, without knowing if rest will come from finding love, or from finally learning how to stop chasing each rejection doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly, wrapped in unanswered messages, delayed replies, polite distance, and the slow realization that someone has already decided not to choose you without ever saying the words. And that silence has a way of making you question yourself, not all at once, but gradually, piece by piece, until you start replaying conversations in your head, wondering what you said wrong, what you should have said differently, whether being honest was a mistake, whether caring too much made you less desirable. And in that space between what you gave and what you received, self-worth is tested in ways no success ever could. At first, you mistake rejection for failure. You think it means you weren't enough, not interesting enough, not calm enough, not exciting enough. And silence feels like judgment because there's no explanation to hold on to, no closure to lean against, just absence. And absence is loud when you care. It fills the room. It follows you into quiet moments. It sits beside you at night when distractions fade. And you start to feel like your value depends on whether someone chooses to stay, whether someone sees what you see in yourself, and that's where the real danger lives. Because the moment you tie your worth to another person's attention, you give away something that was never theirs to hold. Over time, rejection teaches you things you didn't ask to learn. It shows you how often you've been shrinking to fit into spaces that were never built for you, how often you've been patient with people who were careless with your feelings, how often you've accepted uncertainty because you were afraid clarity would push someone away, and silence becomes a mirror, uncomfortable but honest, reflecting back how much you've been negotiating your needs, how often you've been waiting to be chosen instead of choosing yourself, and that realization hurts, not because it's cruel, but because it's true. There's a moment when the pain shifts, when rejection stops feeling like a verdict and starts feeling like information, when you realize that someone not staying doesn't automatically mean you weren't worthy of staying for. It means they weren't capable of meeting you where you stood, and silence, as painful as it is, becomes clearer than mixed signals because it tells you everything without pretending otherwise. It tells you where you stand. It tells you what not to chase. It tells you when to stop pouring energy into a place that gives nothing back. And slowly, without ceremony, you begin to respect yourself enough to listen. Self-worth grows quietly in these moments, not in confident speeches or dramatic decisions, but in small acts of restraint, in choosing not to send the message you already know won't be answered, in not explaining yourself to someone who stopped listening, in letting go without demanding understanding. And that's not weakness, that's strength refined by experience, strength that knows when to step back, strength that understands that being wanted shouldn't require convincing, and that love that needs to be begged for was never love, just attachment dressed up as hope. Silence teaches you boundaries if you let it. It shows you where to stop reaching, where to stop justifying your presence, where to stop proving that you matter, because the truth is you always did, long before anyone failed to see it. And rejection becomes less personal when you understand that people act from their own limitations, their own fears, their own unfinished work, and sometimes they walk away not because you were too much, but because you represented something they weren't ready to face. Consistency, depth, accountability, and accepting that doesn't erase the hurt, but it releases the blame. You start to carry yourself differently after enough rejection, not colder, but clearer. You stop offering explanations where respect should already exist. You stop chasing clarity from people who thrive on ambiguity. And silence no longer feels like abandonment. It feels like space. Space to return to yourself, to rebuild the parts of you that were bent out of shape, trying to be understood by the wrong people. And in that space, self-worth becomes less about being chosen and more about choosing what aligns with you, choosing peace over potential, choosing truth over fantasy, choosing to walk away without needing the other person to validate that decision. And that choice changes how you love, how you trust, how you stand in the world, grounded not in who stayed, but in who you became when they didn't. Grounded in the understanding that your value was never created by someone else's presence and never destroyed by their absence, existing quietly, steadily, even now, even here, even after all the silence, even after all the no answers, carrying forward a version of yourself that no longer begs to be seen because it finally sees itself learning, adjusting, standing still long enough to feel whole again, without applause, without confirmation, without waiting for anyone to come back, holding that self-worth not as armor but as truth, something you no longer argue with, something you protect without defending. something that continues to grow in the quiet, in the pauses, in the moments where you choose not to speak, not to chase, not to explain, and simply remain present with yourself, aware of your value, unshaken by rejection, unmoved by silence, rooted in a deeper understanding that you were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong people, and now you know the difference, and knowing changes everything, even if nothing else does, even if the journey continues, even if love is still somewhere ahead, because this time you're walking with yourself, not ahead of yourself, not behind anyone else, moving forward with a steadiness that wasn't there before, carrying lessons instead of questions, clarity instead of doubt, self-respect instead of fear. And that alone is a kind of arrival. Even if the road keeps going, even if the story keeps unfolding, even if the next chapter hasn't revealed itself yet, you are no longer lost in silence. You are listening to it, learning from it, standing in it, without needing it to answer you back. Hope doesn't disappear all at once. It fades unevenly. Some days it feels solid, almost stubborn, and other days it feels like weight, something you carry because you don't know how to put it down without losing yourself. And choosing hope when belief feels heavy is one of the quietest forms of courage because it isn't loud or confident. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up again after disappointment, after doubt, after the moment you told yourself you wouldn't feel this way anymore. And yet here you are, still feeling, still wanting something real, still refusing to harden completely, even when it would be easier to close off and stop expecting anything from anyone. There's a difference between believing blindly and choosing hope consciously. Blind belief ignores reality, but conscious hope looks directly at everything that has gone wrong and still decides not to become numb. It understands the risks. It remembers the hurt. It carries the memories of what it cost you last time. And still it says yes, not to another person necessarily, but to the idea that connection is still worth striving for. That sincerity still has a place. That love isn't foolish just because it hasn't worked yet. And that decision is heavy because it's informed. It's made with eyes open, with scars present, with hesitation woven into every step forward. You don't choose hope because you're sure. You choose it because the alternative feels like a slow erosion of who you are, because letting go of hope entirely would mean letting go of empathy, softness, and the part of you that believes people can meet you with the same depth you offer. And even when that belief feels unrealistic, even when experience suggests caution, you understand that hope isn't about expecting everyone to show up correctly. It's about refusing to become someone who no longer cares whether they do. And that refusal takes effort, it takes energy, it takes resilience, especially when you're already tired. There are moments when hope feels unfair, when you question why you're the one still believing after everything, why you haven't learned to detach like others seem to do so easily. And in those moments, hope feels less like light and more like responsibility, something you didn't ask for but keep carrying anyway. Because somewhere inside, you know that hope is tied to integrity, to staying aligned with your values, to not letting disappointment rewrite your character. And even when belief feels heavy, you'd rather carry that weight than live without it, because you've seen what emotional emptiness looks like. And you know it isn't peace, it's just absence. Choosing hope doesn't mean ignoring patterns, it means learning from them without letting them define your future. It means adjusting your boundaries without shutting down your heart. It means pacing yourself, resting when needed, but not declaring the journey meaningless just because it's been long. And this kind of hope is quieter, more grounded, less desperate. It doesn't rush toward anyone who shows interest. It doesn't beg for reassurance. It simply remains open, selective, aware, willing, but not reckless, hopeful, but not naive. And that balance is difficult to maintain, especially when loneliness tries to convince you that any connection is better than none. Sometimes hope is just choosing not to speak negatively about love, even when you're disappointed. Sometimes it's refusing to mock the idea of soul-level connection just because you haven't experienced it yet. Sometimes it's staying kind in a world that rewards indifference. And these small choices don't look heroic from the outside, but they shape you slowly. They protect something essential inside you, something that would be easy to lose if you allowed cynicism to take over. And belief becomes less about expecting a specific outcome and more about trusting that staying true to yourself will eventually lead you somewhere that feels right. Belief feels heavy because it has history, because it carries every time you believed before and were wrong, every time you hoped and had to recalibrate, every time you invested emotionally and walked away with less than you brought. And still, here you are, choosing not to weaponize those experiences against the future, choosing not to punish what hasn't happened yet for what already has. And That choice requires strength, a strength that doesn't always feel strong, a strength that often feels like persistence, like endurance, like waking up and deciding not to give up on the possibility of something meaningful. Even when you don't feel optimistic, hope doesn't promise results, it promises alignment, it promises that you won't abandon yourself in the process, that you won't become bitter just to feel protected, that you won't trade depth for convenience. And even when belief feels heavy, you understand that the weight comes from caring, and caring, despite everything, is still something you value, even if it slows you down, even if it makes the journey longer, even if it means feeling more than others seem to, because feeling deeply has always been part of who you are. And choosing hope is really just choosing to honor that truth, carrying it forward carefully, deliberately, without rushing, without demanding certainty, trusting that staying open, even in a measured way, is still better than closing yourself off completely, trusting that one day the weight will feel shared instead of carried alone, trusting that belief doesn't have to be light to be worth holding, trusting that even now, even in the heaviness, you are still moving forward, still intact, still capable of connection, still choosing not to give up on something that matters to you, even when it would be easier to say you don't care. Any more love begins quietly, before it is named, before it is noticed, before anyone else has a chance to reflect it back to you, and it begins in the small, invisible choices you make every day, the moments when you extend kindness without expecting recognition, when you stay present even though you could walk away, when you see someone fully but keep their flaws in perspective. And this kind of love doesn't need applause, it doesn't wait for validation, it exists independently of response, it thrives in the intention to give, in the willingness to care, in the courage to remain open even when there is no guarantee that what you offer will ever be returned, because the act itself, the commitment to feel deeply, to remain sensitive, to embrace vulnerability already matters, already shapes the world, already transforms you. It begins in noticing the beauty of imperfection, in holding someone's humanity alongside your own, in resisting the urge to judge harshly, to demand perfection, to withdraw in fear, and that love builds quietly, like roots under the soil, unseen but persistent, growing strength beneath the surface, stretching toward sunlight, stretching toward warmth, stretching toward the possibility of mutual recognition, even though that recognition may never come. And the paradox is that this kind of love is both fragile and unshakable, because it depends not on reciprocation, but on the integrity of your own heart, on the fidelity you maintain to your own values, on the patience you cultivate to allow connection to develop naturally, to allow another person to grow into what they might become without forcing them, without sacrificing yourself. It begins with self-awareness, knowing your limits, your needs, your boundaries, your patterns, because love given without understanding oneself tends to become chaotic, resentful, and heavy. And when you understand yourself first, love can flow more freely, not as a transaction or a negotiation, but as a pure expression of attention and care, noticing small gestures, listening closely to words and silences alike, responding with presence instead of reaction, holding space instead of filling it with your own fears. And in this practice, love develops patience, the ability to wait without desperation, the ability to give without expectation, the ability to accept without judgment, the ability to allow both yourself and others to exist in full, flawed humanity. Love begins in silence too, in the moments when no one else is watching, when no one else can affirm you, when you are simply choosing to act kindly, thoughtfully, and deliberately. And those moments build the foundation of something far larger than momentary affection, something that carries even through absence, through misunderstanding, through disappointment. Because love that begins here has its own resilience. It does not collapse under neglect. It does not shrink under inattention. It holds its shape, it holds its dignity, it holds its value because it is self-sustaining, nourished by the decision to stay emotionally available, to honor others' humanity, and to honor your own. It begins in consistency, in choosing to show up the same way over time, me, not for recognition, but because it matters to you, because you understand that relationships, meaningful ones, are not instantaneous, they are not transactional. They are cultivated through repetition, through care, through the willingness to maintain integrity even when external circumstances make it inconvenient, even when reciprocity is absent, even when frustration tempts you to withdraw. Because love, in its most enduring form, does not seek immediate reward. It invests quietly, steadily, deliberately, in ways that accumulate over years, in ways that survive absence, in ways that endure misunderstanding, in ways that persist beyond circumstance. It begins in attention, in the simple act of noticing, the way someone's eyes change when they're thinking, the subtle tension in their shoulders, the small details that reveal truth beyond words, and you respond, not with control, not with manipulation, not with demand, but with acknowledgement, with presence, with willingness to accept what is offered, what is revealed, and what is concealed. And through this, love becomes less about what you receive and more about how you witness, how you honor, how you support without erasing, how you embrace without consuming. And this subtle, unassuming act shapes the emotional landscape far more than grand gestures ever could. It begins in patience, in the willingness to wait for understanding, to allow intimacy to emerge at its own pace, to resist the urge to force affection, to hurry at attachment, to demand clarity, to press for reassurance, because true love, the kind that matters, develops slowly, in tandem with trust, with vulnerability, with repeated acts of courage, and this patience teaches humility. The humility to recognize that love is not a conquest, not a possession, not a goal to achieve, but a living, breathing exchange that requires care, attention, and mutual readiness. And in that recognition, you find freedom from expectation, freedom from anxiety, freedom from the illusion that love's value is determined solely by immediate reciprocation. It begins with generosity, in giving what you can without calculation, without insisting on receiving equal measure, in offering kindness, understanding, empathy, forgiveness, compassion, support, and attention. And in doing so, love grows within you, expanding your capacity to experience joy, connection, and fulfillment even before anyone else recognizes it, even before anyone else acknowledges it. Because the act of loving itself is transformative, and this transformation is often invisible, quiet, internal, but it is real. It strengthens your heart, clarifies your intentions, illuminates your values, and prepares you for the relationships that are capable of returning love in kind. It begins with courage, the courage to remain open after pain, after betrayal, after abandonment, the courage to continue giving when past experience suggests caution, the courage to trust that your heart is capable of more than it has already endured, that your capacity to feel deeply is not a liability but a strength, and that choosing to love, even when there is no guarantee of reciprocity, is a form of bravery in itself, a testimony to the resilience of the human spirit, a quiet rebellion against cynicism, against fear, against the impulse to withdraw, against the notion that self-preservation requires closing off completely. And in this courage, love establishes its earliest roots, before words, before gestures, before mutual recognition, before anyone else sees it. It begins with presence, with truly being there, not performing, not pretending, not offering what you think someone wants, but engaging fully, honestly, sincerely in the moments you share, allowing yourself to feel what is present without overthinking, without demanding, without resisting. And this presence becomes fertile ground for love to grow, because love cannot be forced. It cannot be manufactured. It requires the simple, sustained, authentic willingness to be fully seen and to see fully. And in practicing this, even alone, even quietly, even before it is returned, you are cultivating something enduring, something real, something that prepares you, shapes you, and strengthens you for the love that will eventually recognize you. The love that will meet you where you have been waiting all along, the love that begins only after you have already begun to love.